And the man of God sent unto the king of Israel, saying, Beware that thou pass not such a place, for thither the Syrians are come down. And the king of Israel sent to the place which the man of God told him, and warned him of, and saved himself there, not once nor twice. Therefore the heart of the king of Syria was sore troubled for this thing. And he called his servants, and said unto them, Will ye not show me which of us is for the king of Israel? And one of his servants said, None, my lord, O king, but Elisha the prophet that is in Israel telleth the king of Israel the words that thou speakest in thy bedchamber. And he said, Go and spy where he is, that I may send and fetch him. And it was told him, saying, Behold, he is in Dothan. Therefore sent he thither horses and chariots and a great host, and they came by night and compassed the city about. And when the servant of the man of God was risen early and gone forth, behold, an host compassed the city both with horses and chariots. And his servant said unto him, Alas, my master, how shall we do? And he said, Fear not, for they that be with us are more than they that be with them. And Elisha prayed and said, Lord, I pray thee, open his eyes that he may see. And the Lord opened the eyes of the young man, and he saw, and behold, the mountain was full of horses and chariots of fire round about Elisha. So in this quick little example here, the king of Syria was trying to figure out who the mole was in his inner court, because the king of Israel kept knowing these things that they were talking about in private in his bedchamber. And they said, No, it's not one of us, it's the prophet. And so the king of Syria wanted to have a little chat with Elisha regarding these things. And so he sent his host. And they came by night, so they could not be seen, and they encompassed the city where he was. So here we have a servant of Elisha, a man who had seen some pretty amazing things. Yet upon seeing the host of Syria, he was afraid. And honestly, he was probably justified in this fear. I mean, here was a whole army knocking on the door, asking for Elisha. But Elisha wasn't fearful, because he knew what God was going to accomplish. His servant didn't have that kind of faith yet, and so upon seeing the Syrian army, he faltered in the faith he had. Elisha prayed that his eyes be opened, and he saw all the angels in the chariots of fire. And then he believed and was no longer afraid. But his faith didn't come until after he saw the angels, until after he had seen God's provision. Our faith should come long before we ever see anything. Matthew 8:23. And when he entered into a ship, his disciples followed him. And behold, there arose a great tempest in the sea, insomuch that the ship was covered with the waves, but he was asleep. And his disciples came to him and awoke him, saying, Lord, save us, we perish. And he said unto them, Why are ye fearful, O ye of little faith? Then he arose and rebuked the winds and the sea, and there was a great calm. But the men marveled, saying, What manner of man is this, that even the winds and the sea obey him? Parallel passage, Mark 4:35. And the same day, when the even was come, he saith unto them, Let us pass over unto the other side. And when they had sent away the multitude, they took him even as he was in the ship. And there were also with him other little ships. And there arose a great storm of the wind, and the waves beat upon the ship, so that it was now full. And he was in the hinder part of the ship, asleep on a pillow. And they awake him, and say unto him, Master, carest thou not that we perish? And he arose and rebuked the wind, and said unto the sea, Peace, be still. And the wind ceased, and there was a great calm. And he said unto them, Why are ye so fearful? How is it that ye have no faith? And they feared exceedingly, and said one to another, What manner of man is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him? Luke 8:22. Now it came to pass on a certain day that he went into a ship with his disciples, and he said unto them, Let us go over into the other side of the lake. And they launched forth, but as they sailed, he fell asleep. And there came down a storm of wind on the lake, and they were filled with water, and were in jeopardy. And they came to him and awoke him, saying, Master, Master, we perished. Then he arose and rebuked the wind and the raging of the water, and they ceased, and there was a calm. And he said unto them, Where is your faith? And they, being afraid, wondered, saying one to another, What manner of man is this? For he commandeth even the winds and the water, and they obey him. It's interesting in the account in Mark that Jesus said, Peace, be still, and the wind ceased immediately. And yet he tells that to us. And we still fuss and fight. The disciples were very afraid of the storm, to the point they thought they were going to die. And remember, these men were seasoned fishermen who had been on that very sea thousands of times before and had no doubt seen some nasty storms. But this storm was unlike anything they had seen before. It was a supernatural storm. Yet Jesus was still in control. He arose, rebuked the storm, and it ceased. Have you ever been going through a storm of life, maybe the worst storm you've seen? If you have Jesus in your boat with you, you have nothing to worry about. The one whose voice calms the storm is right there with you. Has Jesus ever said to you during the storm, where is your faith? And then he immediately calms the wind and the waves. You faltered in your faith due to fear, and Jesus had to call you out on it. The next symptom of faltering faith is doubt. Doubt is a feeling of uncertainty or skepticism. Will there be a rainbow tomorrow? Will there be a rainbow today? I doubt it. I've seen rainbows in the past and know that certain conditions have to be met in order for one to appear. And I doubt those conditions will exist today. Will the Lions make the playoffs? I highly doubt it. Why? Because the conditions will not be met in order for them to advance. That's not the kind of doubt that causes faith to falter. The doubt here is the uncertainty or skepticism in what God has promised or commanded, especially when God has already proven himself to be worthy of trust in the past. 2 Kings, you should still be there. One chapter back, chapter 5, verses 1. Now Naaman, the captain of the host of the king of Syria, was a great man with his master, and honorable, because by him the Lord had given deliverance unto Syria. He was also a mighty man in valor, but he was a leper. And the Syrians had gone out by companies and had brought away captive out of the land of Israel a little maid, and she waited on Naaman's wife. And she said unto her mistress, Would God my Lord were with the prophet that is in Samaria, for he would recover him of his leprosy. And one went in and told his Lord, saying, Thus and thus said the maid that is of the land of Israel. And the king of Syria said, Go, and I will send a letter unto the king of Israel. And he departed, and took with him 10 talents of silver, and 6,000 pieces of gold, and 10 changes of raiment. And he brought the letter to the king of Israel, saying, Now when this letter is come unto thee, behold, I have therewith sent Naaman my servant to thee, that thou mayest recover him of his leprosy. And it came to pass, when the king of Israel had read the letter, that he rent his clothes and said, Am I God, to kill and to make alive, that this man doth send unto me to recover a man of his leprosy? Wherefore consider, I pray you, and see how he seeketh to quarrel against me. And it was so, when Elisha the man of God had heard that the king of Israel had rent his clothes, that he sent to the king, saying, Wherefore hast thou rent thy clothes? Let him come now to me, and he shall know that there is a prophet in Israel. So Naaman came with his horses and with his chariot, and stood at the door of the house of Elisha. And Elisha sent a messenger unto him, saying, Go and wash in Jordan 7 times, and thy flesh shall come again to thee, and thou shalt be clean. But Naaman was wroth, and went away, and said, Behold, I thought, he will surely come out to me, and stand, and call on the name of the Lord his God, and strike his hand over the place, and recover the leper. And are not Abana and Pharpar, rivers of Damascus, better than all the waters of Israel? May I not wash in them and be clean? So he turned and went away in a rage. And his servants came near and spake unto him, and said, My father, if the prophet had bid thee do some great thing, wouldest thou not have done it? How much rather then, when he saith to thee, Wash and be clean? Then went he down and dipped himself 7 times in Jordan, according to the saying of the man of God. And his flesh came again like unto the flesh of a little child, and he was clean. And he returned to the man of God, and he and all his company, and came and stood before him. And he said, Behold, now I know that there is no God in all the earth, but in Israel. Now therefore I pray thee, take a blessing of thy servant. But he said, As the Lord liveth, before whom I stand, I will receive none. And he urged him to take it, but he refused. And Naaman said, Shall there not then, I pray thee, be given to thy servant 2 mules, burden of earth? For thy servant shall henceforth offer neither burnt offering nor sacrifice unto other gods, but unto the Lord. In this thing the Lord pardon thy servant, that when my master goeth into the house of Rimmon to worship there, and he leaneth on my hand, and I bow myself in the house of Rimmon, when I bow down myself in the house of Rimmon, the Lord pardon thy servant in this thing. And he said unto him, Go in peace. So he departed from him a little way. We'll stop there in that story, but if you read the rest, it's very interesting what his servant did. And his servant was punished for some very foolish decisions he made. You can read that for yourself. This is quite a fascinating account, and we don't have time to fully uncover all the truths and idioms that are expressed in it, especially as it relates to the gospel and to the parallel to the salvation experience. But we'll just quickly go over the main points as it related to faltering faith. Naaman was a Syrian general, which meant not only was he a Gentile, but he was also a pagan. He stood in high favor with the king, was a mighty man of war, and no doubt had much riches. He had made it, except for one thing. He was a leper. And that one additional piece of information changes everything regarding Naaman. Naaman suffered from the most fearful and dreadful disease of the ancient world, a disease which had no respect for his prominence and fame. All Naaman's strength, all his valor, all his victories, all his money could not save him from leprosy. Naaman's healing came through the simple witness of a servant girl that had been taken from her home country. What a contrast she presents to Naaman himself. This girl had no power, no status, no fame. In fact, we don't even know her name, but she did have faith in God, and this was her only distinction. She had faith, and she let it be known. That's really all God expected of her, but the whole story hinges on her simple word of witness. Naaman's healing is a great story, a wonderful example of God's power and mercy, but it never would have happened without the courage of that unknown Israelite slave girl who spoke a word of testimony to the God of Israel. Notice that God, through the prophet Elisha, offered Naaman healing without cost. He did not discriminate against Naaman for not being an Israelite. He didn't conjure up a list of his past sins. He didn't ask for anything in return. He just said, "Go wash." What did Naaman have to do to be healed? First, he had to believe the prophet. James says that faith without works is dead. We've looked at that extensively. If you really believe in something, you're going to act upon it. Naaman had to trust the prophet's words in order to go wash. Second, Naaman had to humble himself. He had to submit to the one way of healing that God offered. Naaman had other thoughts about how this healing should happen. God's way was a muddy river, dunking himself not once, nor going for a normal swim, but dunking himself 7 times, which might have seemed strange. At first, pride got in the way of Naaman's faith, which caused him to doubt the directions given by Elisha. He had arrived having faith, thanks to his servant girl, that God would heal him. But when God tested that faith through the instructions given by Elisha on what to do, he doubted, and it almost cost him everything. Thanks to the quick thinking by his servants who convinced him to at least try it, what do you have to lose? He was healed. I imagine the first couple dunks he wasn't impressed, doubting still as he came up, looking at his arms, seeing the leprous spots, mocking him. A few more dunks and nothing was accomplished other than he was wet. I can imagine him saying to his servants that this wasn't going to work and that he was wasting his time, maybe even starting towards the shore. But when he humbled himself and went down and up that 7th time, he emerged from the dirty Jordan cleaner than he had ever been. And in that moment, his faith was made unbreakably strong. Naaman faltered in his faith, yet persevered and humbled himself. He did exactly what God told him and received exactly what God promised. But did he just get healed? No, he got to know God. And this high-ranking, important Syrian general, through a servant girl and a lonely prophet, was introduced to the one true God, and God returned with him to his land. An interesting part of this story, normally it stops right after he rose and was cleansed, and that's a beautiful miracle. But when you look at the end, roughly verse 15 to where we stopped in 19, you see that Naaman was not just healed physically, he was spiritually healed. He said in verse 15, "Behold, now I know that there is no God in all the earth, but in Israel." You see, Naaman showed up with a letter from his king expecting some great pomp and circumstance, and Elisha didn't even go out of his house. He sent a servant. And Naaman was definitely prideful, and he said, "Excuse me? Do you know who I am?" And this is just after the king was like, the Syrian guy sent them a letter to heal Naaman. He's like, "I'm not going to do anything. He just wants to start another war with me." And he rents his clothes. And so Naaman shows up expecting this massive entourage because of who he was, and Elisha didn't care who he was. He didn't even show up. He sent a servant out to go tell him to jump in the river. Yeah. That's what he told him. And Naaman was wroth. Are you kidding me? I'm surprised Naaman just didn't bulldoze his house right there. But see, that happens to us. Because we get this pride in the way, and we say, "Excuse me, God. Do you know who I am?" So Naaman does it, and experiences God for the first time. And so Naaman goes back to Elisha, and I love this part. Like immediately changed. Like his whole outlook, his demeanor, completely changed. Now he's humbled. He goes to Elisha and says, "Can I give you anything?" And Elisha said, "No, because the gift of God is free. It doesn't cost anything." And Naaman said, "Okay, is it okay if I take 2 mules worth of earth from Israel?" And this is the part you don't hear much, because I think maybe the people speaking don't understand what he's saying there. He said, "The one true God's in Israel, and if I can't be here to worship in Israel, I'm going to take Israel with me." And he literally took 2 mules worth of earth to make an altar in Syria where he worshiped the Lord on holy ground. It's fascinating. And then verse 18 is a little tricky if you don't understand what's being said. So being a general in the Syrian army, he had specific duties. And one of those was to take the king to his place of worship and to be there to protect him and to support him in his worship of his God, Rimmon, as we see in verse 18. And Naaman knew that he still had this obligation. So he talked to Elisha and said, "I'm not going to sacrifice other gods. I am fully in this thing, but here's the deal. I'm going to have to go in the house of Rimmon, and I'm going to have to support my king. And when I bow myself down, I'm not worshiping, is basically a job I have to do. Can you ask God to forgive me already?" And Elisha says, "The Lord pardon thy servant in this thing." Jesus himself made a point to call to remembrance the account of Naaman's miraculous healing while he was in a synagogue in Nazareth on the Sabbath day. Luke 4:27. And many lepers were in Israel in the time of Elijah, and none of them was cleansed, saving Naaman the Syrian. And all they in the synagogue, when they heard these things, were filled with wrath. What set them off? Jesus had just used 2 examples of provision and healing to Gentiles, while simultaneously Jewish people were going without provision and healing. Time after time, we see that the Jews missed out on blessings due either to their unbelief or to their unawareness. And that's what set those Jewish leaders off. As Jesus said, there were many lepers that were Jews, but only Naaman was healed. And you read through that, and you're like, "Oh, well, that's nice." But you forget the point that Naaman was a Gentile pagan, and he was healed of leprosy. But God's own chosen people were not. And that's what set them off. All right, I'm going to hasten here, so buckle up. There are four faults we're going to talk about. We're only going to get through 2 today. We're going to finish with this last one. I'll be quick on this one. Matthew 14, please. And as soon as we get there, I'm going to read. So Matthew 14, verse 22. And straightway Jesus constrained his disciples to get into a ship and to go before him on the other side while he sent the multitudes away. And when he had sent the multitudes away, he went up into a mountain apart to pray. And when the evening was come, he was there alone. But the ship was now in the midst of the sea, tossed with waves, for the wind was contrary. And in the fourth watch of the night, Jesus went unto them, walking on the sea. And when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were troubled, saying, It is a spirit. And they cried out for fear. But straightway Jesus spake unto them, saying, Be of good cheer, it is I, be not afraid. And Peter answered him and said, Lord, if it be thou, bid me come unto thee on the water. And he said, Come. And when Peter was come down out of the ship, he walked on the water to go to Jesus. But when he saw the wind boisterous, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried, saying, Lord, save me. And immediately Jesus stretched forth his hand and caught him and said unto him, O thou of little faith, wherefore didst thou doubt? And when they were come into the ship, the wind ceased. Then they that were in the ship came and worshipped him, saying, Of a truth, thou art the Son of God. This event happened directly after Jesus fed the 5,000. The disciples that just saw Jesus perform an amazing miracle. You'd think their faith would have been rock solid. And maybe it was the miracle they had just witnessed that emboldened Peter to try to walk on the water. Peter was going through a literal storm. The storm was raging, but Jesus still bade him come to him. Peter got out of the boat and was walking on the water. It's important to notice that Jesus didn't stop the storm before Peter stepped out. We have no idea how far Peter walked, but as you know, he let the winds and the rain distract him, and he lost sight of Jesus. Yes, there was a lot going on around him, but he let his eyes and his mind and his heart focus on those things and not on the object of his faith. For we walk by faith and not by sight. And apparently that includes on water during a tremendous storm. Our problems start when we walk by sight and not by faith. Jesus then reached out his hand, caught up Peter, and helped him to the boat. I think it's pretty interesting that in the account given in John chapter 6 about this event, that as soon as they had gotten back in the boat, they were immediately at their destination. Did they drift that far without their knowledge while this whole scene was unfolding? Possibly. But I like to think that as soon as Jesus stepped foot onto the boat, after Peter, of course, that immediately the storm was gone, the wind and the waves were calm, and they were sitting at the dock at their destination. And all the disciples were just looking around, eyeing each other, still soaking wet from the storm that literally just disappeared. In Matthew 14, when Jesus commanded the disciples to feed the 5,000, they very much doubted that there would be enough food. Jesus tested their faith by giving them an action to do, feeding the people. And they faltered by doubting it was possible. Jesus didn't call them out on their lack of faith at that time. He just shook his head, prayed for the food, and started passing it out. And they doubted him again, not one chapter later, when he fed another multitude of 4,000. Jesus did not call them out then for their lack of faith either, but he did call them out in chapter 16, Matthew 16:5. And when his disciples were come to the other side, they had forgotten to take bread. I think that's ironic. They just passed out enough bread to feed 5,000, and they forgot. Oh man, they say, we forgot the leftovers in the boat. Then Jesus said unto them, Take heed and beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and of the Sadducees. And they reasoned among themselves, saying, It is because we have taken no bread. That's why Jesus said that. Which when Jesus perceived, he said unto them, O ye of little faith, why reason ye among yourselves, because ye have brought no bread? Do ye not yet understand, neither remember the 5 loaves of the 5,000, or how many baskets ye took up? Neither the 7 loaves of the 4,000, or how many baskets ye took up? Jesus fed multitudes on 2 occasions, on at least 2 that are recorded in Scripture. You'd think when the second time it happened, his disciples would recognize the situation and think, oh yeah, he's got this. But they didn't. They doubted. But let us not be too hasty in judging them. How many times do we do the exact same thing? We've seen God provide for us before, but this time is too much for him to handle. We doubt that there is no way that God can work out these circumstances or problems. And then, after God does work everything out, oftentimes in a miraculous manner, he looks at us and says, where is your faith? I got one last little story for you, and then we're going to cut it halfway through today. So back in college, normally college students don't have a whole lot of money. And if they have a lot of money, they're doing something wrong. Or maybe they're doing something right, I guess. But I remember there was a missions conference for a week, and I fought the Lord all week. And finally, on the last night, I gave what little I had in my pocket just to appease God. I don't know if you've ever done that. Do something just to appease him. Just to make myself feel better, like I had done some great thing. Though I knew that it wasn't going to make any difference. What little I had, it was not going to matter. What I gave wasn't going to matter. It wasn't even going to be noticed. I doubted that what little I had to offer was worth anything. And so the next week they put up the totals given during the conference. And I don't remember the exact number, but I mean, it was a pretty good sized number. But the number ended in 2 zeros. And in the tens place, and in the cents place, was the amount I had given. Only God and I knew that about. And it was like $10,000 straight and $2.13. And that was mine, $2.13. Talk about faltering in my faith. The Lord said to me, "Why do you have such little faith?" His work was going to happen regardless of me, but he wanted me to take part of it and reap the blessings. Yeah, I'm going to put a pin in it right there. If I rush through the other two, I think I'm going to do a disservice to what I feel like the Lord has for you there. So we're going to stop there. Next week, we're going to finish this look at faltering faith, and we're going to look at the other two symptoms. And I'll tell you them right now, I guess, so I won't leave you on a cliffhanger. The third symptom of faltering faith is worry. And the fourth symptom of faltering faith is anxiety. And we will talk about that next week. Let's pray. Lord, we thank you for your goodness this morning. Lord, forgive us for our lack of faith.